The phone rang with a sharpness that tore through the silence of John Miller's apartment. Ah! His heart lurched as he saw the bank's number glow across the screen. He answered with a trembling hand. The banker's tone was flat, clinical, slicing away hope. "Mr. Miller, multiple withdrawals are showing from your account." John's chest tightened as amounts he never authorized spilled like stones in his ear. The banker paused, then added, "Your balance is 0. John's knees buckled. He clutched the table, mind flashing with Emma Carter's calm smile and her words, "You'll never lose a penny." His throat dried, breath uneven as he whispered, "This can't be." The banker repeated the words with grim finality. His savings, his entire life's work, had vanished into thin air, stolen by the one person he trusted most. John sat frozen at the table, the rain pounding harder, mocking his stillness. His mind replayed Emma's words, her voice warm, promising safety. He whispered, "It was all a lie." He slammed his fist onto the table, pain flaring through his arm. His reflection in the window looked older, broken, a stranger staring back. He remembered his father's warning, "Guard your savings, John." He had betrayed that wisdom. His chest tightened, a howl caught behind his teeth. He whispered again, "Why didn't I see it?" But the storm outside answered louder than he could. John grabbed the phone again, fingers fumbling. He called Emma, desperate for her voice, for denial, for anything. It rang into silence. Voicemail beeped, hollow and cruel. He whispered, "Emma, call me back, please." The words cracked mid-sentence. His eyes darted to framed photos of his family on the wall, their smiles mocking him now. Every overtime shift, every sacrifice, all gone. His chest heaved as panic clawed at his ribs. He shoved the phone aside, unable to look at its glow. Fear grew teeth in the silence, biting down hard. Meanwhile, Emma Carter sipped wine in her sleek apartment, city lights shimmering behind her. She glanced at her phone, smirking as John's frantic voicemail popped up. Without hesitation, she swiped it away. She whispered, "He'll believe anything." The glass clinked softly against marble counter, a sound of triumph. She opened her laptop, face glowing in warm light, fingers typing with poise. The city outside sparkled like accomplices in her crime, indifferent to the man unraveling miles away. John's memory dragged him back to that first handshake. Emma leaned forward across a small desk, smile radiating trust. She said, "You'll never regret trusting me." He remembered nodding, eyes full of fragile hope, desperate to believe her. The scene now mocked him. Every word, venom in hindsight. His hand trembled as he muttered, "I wanted to believe." He hated her, but more than that, he hated himself for letting trust blind him. The memory burned, leaving scars that no time could soften. John's memories pulled him backward, before the call, before the collapse. He remembered the weight of bills stacked on the counter, each envelope heavier than the last. His father's advice haunted him, save for the storm. He had done that, building his nest egg one overtime shift at a time, every dollar scraped from sacrifice. He carried the dream of finally escaping the cycle of worry, picturing vacations he never took, a home free of debt, a life untouched by fear. Thought of security had been his anchor, and Emma knew it. She had seen his struggle, read the tired lines on his face, and offered him a way out. He thought she was salvation, not the storm. Sarah Blake, John's closest friend, had warned him from the start. She remembered the first time he introduced Emma, her gut whispering caution. Sarah was sharp, grounded, unwilling to trust too easily. She told him, "She's too smooth, John. People like that don't just show up." But his hope drowned out her reason. Sarah watched his excitement with folded arms, seeing red flags he refused to acknowledge. Every warning she gave became another wall he built against her. It hurt her to be shut out, but she could see where it was heading. Emma knew exactly how to touch John's weakness. She didn't pitch investments with numbers. She painted pictures. She spoke of stability, of money multiplying quietly while he rested. she said. Imagine waking up and knowing tomorrow is safe. Her tone was gentle, confident, carrying the rhythm of someone who believed her own lies. John nodded, eyes lighting with fragile relief. He clung to her words like a lifeline, blind to the subtle satisfaction in her smile. She leaned closer, reassuring, "This is not risk. This is certainty." It was the perfect trap. David Harris, a mid-level bank officer, had noticed irregularities weeks before. The withdrawals were unusual, frequent, but he buried the thought under piles of paperwork. He told himself it wasn't his problem. He had seen fraud before, but stepping in always came at a cost. He hesitated, staring at the screen late one evening, cursor blinking on the flagged account. With a sigh, he closed the window and went home. His silence wasn't out of ignorance but fear. Fear of attention, fear of conflict, fear of being dragged into something ugly. John once told Emma his dream: to buy a small lakeside cabin where his family could rest. His eyes softened as he described summers filled with laughter, fishing lines on calm water, evenings by a fire. "I just want peace," he confessed. Emma's smile had been perfectly timed, reassuring, encouraging. She said, "That dream will be real, John. You deserve it." The words struck deep, soothing every ache of his long years. He believed her. He saw the cabin, heard the water, and for the first time, he thought maybe life would finally give him something back. The afternoon hum of the co-working lounge felt like momentum he could borrow. Emma guided John to a quiet table, her smile measured and warm. "Emma," said, "I want you to stop living from alarm to alarm." She opened a sleek folder and slid charts across the wood. The curves rose like promises he could finally touch. John said, "You make it sound simple." Emma said, "It is simple when risk is engineered and watched." She spoke about custody accounts, oversight, and safeguards. Her voice softened on the word safe, as if it were a place she could drive him to. John pictured mornings without dread, and nights without counting. Emma said, "Let me carry the worry so you can carry your life." He nodded, a little embarrassed by the relief loosening his chest. She tapped the paper and said, "We start small, we scale, we stay disciplined." The room blurred into a reassuring hush as trust took root. Emma introduced Mark in a glass meeting room that smelled faintly of toner and polish. Mark said, "I handle compliance and the boring bits." He laughed softly and produced references with careful hands. The pages looked official enough to quiet doubt. Mark said, "We use segregated accounts and independent auditors." John asked about access, transfer limits, and oversight. Mark answered without delay, sliding into neat checklists. Emma watched John with patient pride, letting trust grow by inches. Mark said, "Start with what you can sleep on, expand when you see results." The rhythm felt responsible and almost kind. John signed preliminary forms that felt temporary and safe. Emma said, "You are in control at every step." Mark gathered the papers like a magician pocketing a coin. John chose to believe the world could finally be orderly. Sarah met him in a corner cafe that smelled like burned sugar and rain-damp coats. She studied his face and saw a softness that worried her. Sarah said, "You are walking into a velvet trap." John said, "I checked them out." She snorted and pulled a tablet from her bag. Sarah said, "This firm has no real footprint, only glossy pages." She showed filings that did not match the dates Emma gave. John felt the old fear stir and pushed it away like smoke. John said, "They have an auditor." Sarah said, "So does every good lie." Her voice cracked with the effort of carrying that hard. She reached across the table and squeezed his wrist. Sarah said, "If I am wrong, I will apologize forever." She held his gaze and added, "If I am right, you will lose everything." Traffic hissed outside as the warning settled between them. Sunset burned the skyline while bass rolled through a rooftop bar. Emma stood with the city behind her like proof she owned gravity. Emma said, "First week and your trial position is up 3%. She held out her phone, and a tidy graph climbed without strain. Laughter from nearby tables framed the moment like applause. John said I could breathe if it stayed like this. Emma said, breathing is the baseline, thriving is the plan. Mark raised a glass from a stool and nodded approval. Emma said, we lock gains, we trim noise, we protect the base. The lines landed with the weight of practiced certainty. John imagined calling Sarah with good news and felt taller. Emma tucked a strand of hair and watched him glow. She said, you are exactly the kind of client who wins. City lights flickered like an algorithm blessing his trust. Night pressed in while he sat at his kitchen table with a laptop open to emails. Transaction notices stacked like teeth in a tight, satisfied smile. One memo line used a different entity name than the others. The routing number matched, but the account nickname did not. John said, probably an internal label, and tried to breathe. He searched the firm name and found a mirror company in another state. Their addresses differed by one digit in a building he did not know. A draft of dread slid under the door and chilled his ankles. A second email arrived with a stamp 1 minute before the first. John said, that is not how batching works, and felt heat rise. The dashboard he adored earlier refused to refresh when he clicked. He stared at a spinning icon and felt the world tilt. He whispered, tomorrow I will ask more questions, and saved nothing. The room held its breath as trust learned to wobble. The call from the bank arrived like a cold blade at dawn. John sat upright in bed, pulse racing. The banker's voice carried no comfort, only urgency. Mr. Miller, we've flagged multiple transfers. John said, transfers? I didn't authorize any. The banker paused and added, the amounts are significant and tied to external accounts. His breath caught, the numbers rattling like nails against glass. John whispered, this can't be happening. He clutched the phone tighter, as if grip alone could reverse time. The banker said, you need to come in immediately. His world tilted, the night's shadows dragging into the morning. He stared at the ceiling and thought, she promised safety. Later that morning, Mark walked into the bank lobby as if nothing had cracked. He adjusted his cufflinks, nodded at the receptionist, and smiled with a calm too clean. John froze when he saw him. John said, you. Mark's lips curved into something sharp and dismissive. John, you really thought this game was built for you. His words hit harder than the banker's. John's chest heaved, betrayal crawling like fire. He thought of Emma's confidence, Sarah's warnings, and his own desperate need to believe. Mark leaned closer, his voice low. Some of us are here to take. You were here to give. The air inside him broke when the truth spread across his mind like spilled ink. Emma had been the architect, Mark the accomplice. Their kindness had been currency, and he had been their perfect vault. John whispered, it was all planned. The silence pressed against his ears until he heard his own heartbeat as proof he still existed. He remembered Emma's hand on his shoulder, Mark's calm voice about compliance, and every chart that climbed like a lie. He clenched his fists and said, you both knew. The weight of betrayal landed heavier than poverty itself. Sarah stormed into John's apartment, anger and sorrow spilling into one. She slammed a folder onto the table. Sarah said, I warned you. Her voice cracked as she pointed to the documents. The addresses don't exist, the licenses are forged, and you still signed. John said, I wanted to believe. His words tasted bitter in the air. Sarah's eyes glistened with both rage and pity. She said, you trusted strangers more than the people who cared. Her voice softened. I tried to save you. He looked down, shame curling him into silence. By evening, Emma was gone. Her apartment stripped of personal touches, her glass of wine still on the counter, but the rest vanished like smoke. John stood outside the building, staring up at the empty window where she had once looked invincible. The city roared around him, but the silence inside felt louder. He whispered, she left nothing. The truth burned deeper than loss of money. It was the erasure of every moment he thought was real. His chest ached with the echo of her laughter, now poison. He understood then. She had been rehearsing her exit all along. They reached the rented suite with the kind of urgency that scrapes paint. Fluorescents hummed like anxious insects above the glass door. Sarah said, "No more emails, no more delays." John pushed in and felt heat climb his neck. Mark looked up from a laptop and smiled as if greeting a delivery. John said, "Reverse the transfers now." Mark said, "That is not how settlements work." Sarah slid a folder across the table like an indictment. Sarah said, "This address is a shell." John held bank printouts that shook along with his hands. Mark said, "You signed consent on every allocation." John said, "You engineered consent with lies." Mark stood to leave, aiming for the door. John stepped in front and said, "Where is Emma?" The room shrank until only breath and paper remained. The hallway coughed up a witness John never expected. A woman clutched a tote and a phone that would not stop buzzing. Lily said, "Is Emma inside?" Her voice trembled like glass in a truck bed. Sarah said, "Who are you?" The woman swallowed and steadied. Lily said, "She told me we were partners, not clients." John felt something heavy shift from anger to pity. Lily held up statements with the same account number and a different promise. Lily said, "She called me her anchor." The word hurt in a new way. Sarah said, "She used you to make him feel safe." Lily exhaled like someone releasing a held breath that lasted months. John said, "You are not alone." Emma arrived as if summoned by the sound of her name. She stepped through the door with a calm that dared the room to believe her. Emma said, "Everyone breathe." John felt every promise she ever spoke scrape past his ribs. John said, "You stole my life." Emma tilted her head as if assessing a product return. Emma said, "You invested and markets moved." Sarah said, "Licenses forged, addresses fake." Emma smiled the way a lock clicks. Emma said, "You trusted us because you wanted certainty." Lily flinched as the sentence cut through the air. John said, "I trusted you because you rehearsed kindness." The silence afterward felt surgical. Rage spilled like a knocked glass and kept spilling. John swept the desk clear and papers flew like startled gulls. John said, "You will answer for all of it." Emma did not flinch. She only watched the pages circle. Emma said, "The law is a maze if you can read it." Sarah said, "Then get lost in it." Lily gathered the scattered forms with hands that learned urgency fast. Mark said, "This tantrum changes nothing." John stepped closer and felt fear convert into insistence. "And," John said, "name the banks, name the custodians, name the path." Emma's eyes narrowed with interest rather than worry. Emma said, "You finally sound like a client worth keeping." Footsteps gathered outside as if consequence had feet. A building manager hovered, radio in hand, not yet choosing courage. Emma lifted her chin and set her final blade. Emma said, "The money did not vanish. It just prefers me." John felt the line carve a mark he would never sand down. Sarah said, "We have the trail, and we have each other." Lily stepped beside John and raised her phone recorder. Lily said, "Say that again." Mark reached to close the laptop and found John's hand already there. John said, "No more exits." Emma's smile thinned like a wire. The door clicked shut. The room grew small. The game finally stopped expanding. The investigators arrived with the weight of inevitability. Their coats dripped rain onto the marble floor as they spread evidence across the desk. The lead officer said, "We traced the transfers, shell companies stacked like mirrors." John's chest ached as the truth folded tighter. Sarah whispered, "This is what justice looks like when it crawls." Lily hovered near the door, clutching her phone like a weapon of memory. Mark shifted uneasily, his charm fraying. Emma sat poised, one leg crossed, expression carved from stone. The officer said, "You'll answer every line, every signature." The silence afterward was not relief, but the first step into reckoning. David Harris stood outside the glass wall, hands trembling. He had been the one who noticed the irregularities first, the one who stayed silent. Now, his silence stood trial too. John glared through the glass, his disappointment sharper than accusation. David whispered, "I should have spoken sooner." The officer said, "You knew and chose quiet." David pressed his palm against the glass as if begging for absolution. Sarah muttered, "Silence is complicity." His reflection looked like a stranger he no longer recognized. He turned away, carrying guilt heavier than chains, knowing his hesitation sealed John's ruin. In the interrogation room, John's voice cracked as he gave his statement. He laid out every promise, every false reassurance, every smile Emma had sold him. His words stumbled, but his pain sharpened them into truth. The officer asked, "Did you ever suspect fraud?" John shook his head, shame thick in his throat. He said, "I wanted to believe in something safe." Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder, grounding him. Lily recorded each detail, determined no one would rewrite the story. Emma smirked faintly, as if confession itself amused her. The officer scribbled, "Pattern of deception confirmed." Emma finally faced the question she could not outtalk. The officer said, "Do you deny orchestrating these transactions?" Emma leaned back, calm as ever. She said, "I deny nothing. I confirm nothing." Mark shifted, eyes darting, sweat darkening his collar. Sarah snapped, "You exploited his trust like a ledger to balance." Emma turned, voice silky. "Trust is offered, not stolen." John slammed his fist on the table. John said, "You knew exactly what you were doing." The room shuddered with the weight of the confrontation. Lily whispered, "Record every word." The officer's pen paused, hovering like a gavel. When the night finally bled into silence, John sat alone at his kitchen table. The investigators had left, Emma had been led away, Mark restrained. Yet the emptiness remained. The savings of a lifetime were gone, the dreams reduced to ash. He traced the rim of a coffee mug, the sound hollow in the quiet. Sarah sat across from him, exhausted but unbroken. Sarah said, "They may face justice, but scars don't fade." Lily texted updates, her determination fierce even through grief. John whispered, "What's left of me now?" Sarah answered, "The part that survived." He realized survival was a victory carved from ruin. The apartment was quiet, except for the faint hum of the fridge. Sarah sat across from John, her hands wrapped around a cooling mug. She said, "It could have been worse. You could have never known." John laughed without humor, the sound flat and broken. He said, "Knowing feels like worse." Sarah leaned in, her face drawn, and whispered, "You're still here. That matters." John stared at his palms, lines deepened by grief. He said, "She burned trust I didn't know was flammable." Sarah closed her eyes, her voice softening. "You were prey, but you fought back in the end." Silence lingered, heavy but less cruel, like the air before dawn. Later, Lily stood on the street outside, her breath fogging in the cold. She listened to the voicemail Emma had once left her, soft promises now hollow echoes. Emma's voice said, "You're the only one I trust." The words twisted in her gut. She whispered, "How many others heard that line?" Her hand shook as she deleted the message, the sound final. A tear slid down her cheek, anger and grief mixing into something sharper. She said, "Never again." The city moved around her, indifferent, neon lights flickering like false stars. She turned her back on the skyline and walked away. John sat at his desk, days later, papers spread out like scars. In the mess was one envelope Emma had slipped him long ago, unopened. He tore it open with shaking hands. Inside was a handwritten note. "Trust is the easiest currency." His stomach clenched as the words bled across his mind. He whispered, "She planned it all from the start." His throat burned with the weight of humiliation. Sarah entered quietly, watching his hands tremble over the paper. She said nothing, because no words could soften that knife. John folded the letter slowly, as if burying a corpse. Emma's voice returned like a ghost through a recording seized by investigators. They played it back for John, her calm, rehearsed tone dripping with contempt. Emma said, "People beg to be deceived, it saves them from choice." The room felt colder, her absence louder than presence. John shut his eyes, her voice rapping like barbed wire. Sarah's jaw tightened as if grinding against fury. Lily muttered, "She wanted this message to outlive her." The officer paused the tape, silence slicing sharper than sound. John whispered, "She's still winning, even now." On a gray morning, John walked alone by the river. Water churned beneath the bridge, restless and endless. He thought of cabins, laughter, the life he once pictured. All erased. Yet the ache kept him moving. He whispered, "She wrote the script before I even entered the stage." Truth did not comfort him, it chained him. A gull cried overhead, cutting the silence. He stopped, watching the water swirl, realizing scars were permanent companions. He closed his eyes and whispered, "I'll never unhear her voice." The river carried his words away, leaving only the echo inside.